They pioneered the use of new techniques in problem solving, defining theories of change, metrics evaluation. In short, all sorts of things that you could almost call an engineering approach that would be very comfortable and familiar to us here at Google. And so about 11 years ago, when Hewlett decided that one of the most strategic things they could do would be to teach strategic philanthropy to other people, they tapped Christine Sherry to head up the program of what was called the Philanthropy Workshop West. And so from its inception, 11 years ago, is it 11 years ago or 10 or 11 years ago, until TPW became an independent entity last year, Christine was the founding director, the leader, and basically the heart of the Philanthropy Workshop West. So she's here today to give us a small sampling of the sort of thing that TPW taught, which TPW was an intensive, comprehensive introduction to making change, giving in a way that would make changes that you wanted out in the world. So I am pleased and honored to welcome a teacher, friend, and mentor, Christine Sherry.
Thank you.
And I'm now going to ask for a few seconds to put in the tape and hit go.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here, and it's great to have Pablo have invited me. He was part of a year-long class that we did. We traveled all over the world, and he's a really great guy to be sitting on the back of the bus with when you're about 5 hours into a site visit looking at kind of rural water purification projects, and you need a good laugh. He asked the best questions of anybody. That incredible Google brain, you see his eyes kind of glaze, and he would come up with these amazing questions that were just the most right-on things, and took the absolute best notes of anybody in the class, so that when the rest of us were a little bit lost and didn't know the answer to something, we could always turn to him and get his notebook, and he was terrific at sharing it. So it's fun to be here. And thank you, Jay, as well, for including me today in your presentation. Let me ask a couple questions. How many of you are all here because you're interested in thinking about how to pitch a project to the Google Corporate Giving Council? Okay, good. And how many of you are here because you're faced with the dilemma of how you have to choose between a bunch of different nonprofits and trying to get your head around how to make some good choices? Cool. Okay, well, we're going to try to talk a little bit about both of those things today, but I wanted to start with just literally a minute or two on the basic principles of strategic philanthropy. So what is strategic philanthropy? Well, there's a lot of ways of thinking about philanthropy. You can have faith-based philanthropy. You can have fate-based philanthropy, where you go to a dinner party and you sit next to somebody and they talk to you about some great nonprofit that you ought to support. And because they're your friend, you go to their fundraiser and they get your name on a list, and pretty soon you're getting solicitations, and pretty soon you're giving them money, and then one day you wake up and say, how did I get here? Strategic philanthropy is a little bit different. It is based on focused analysis. It is based on having a strategy for your work that's clear and well defined. It's based on being really smart about how you execute, and it's based on thorough follow-up. So we've all made charitable investments where you're watching something like the Haiti earthquake scenario. You want to act, you text in a donation to somebody, and that's a good, important, in the moment, feel good effort. What we're going to be talking about today is really a much more rigorous, in some ways engineering kind of based thinking that says, what's the outcome that I'm looking for? How do I really think smart about making an investment that hits that outcome and move forward? So what's a gold standard? Well, the best philanthropists, and I had the pleasure of working with the Hewlett and Rockefeller Foundations for about 10 years, really clear about what it is that they're trying to achieve, really clear about a strategy that's going to get them there. They are ruthlessly clear about the proposals that they want to consider, and they're thoughtful about how they communicate that to the world. Because the reality about philanthropy, for those of you who are facing this, is there are literally millions of organizations and projects that you can support, and you can't support any of them. Nobody can, even Bill Gates. So you've got to be clear about what is it that you're going to consider. You need to have some kind of framework for figuring out whether what you're doing makes any difference. At the end of the day, it's great to give a donation to a group because you feel good in the moment. But what we're really talking about here today is how you evaluate whether your dollars are making any kind of significant impact. And finally, knowing something about the field. It's really tough to understand the complexity of a lot of global problems. It's not necessary for you to understand all of that, but it's important for you to understand how to figure out where to go. So that's sort of the gold standard of what we're talking about strategic philanthropy. So why should you care? Well, fundamentally, I'd say there are 3 reasons. First, you don't want to waste your money, yours or Google's. For every problem that there is to try to take on, whether it's climate change or global poverty issues, there are not enough bucks to make a significant difference in private philanthropy and governments and elsewhere. So you don't want to waste your money, particularly those of you who have earned it and who will want to enjoy the possibility of giving it away in a smart way over the years. You want to get the most bang for your buck. Google wants that. You individually want that. So how do you make a philanthropic choice that's going to give you the most leverage for the dollar that you invest? And finally, something that people don't talk about a lot, do no harm, or in the local vernacular, evil. This isn't an idea that frequently would come to people's mind right out of the gate, but there are actually a lot of reasons why you need to think really long and hard about how you're going to do this work in a really thoughtful way, because there could be unintended consequences of giving money to projects or programs that are not well designed. I mean, the big debate that's going on in the microfinance arena right now, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, which is whether giving loans to poor people at what are potentially usurious interest rates is actually a good idea if they get into greater debt than they were before they got the loan and have no capacity to repay, is a perfect example of how smart philanthropy involves first and foremost doing no harm. But it also involves doing no harm to those folks who were seeking your money. Because if you spend a lot of time pursuing proposals or interviewing people or asking people a million questions when it's unlikely that you would ever fund them, that's actually an opportunity cost problem for them. So you need to think about how do you go through this process in a really smart way so that you're getting the biggest bang for your philanthropic dollars and you're doing no harm. Okay, so we're going to talk today about one particular aspect of strategic philanthropy, which is how do you analyze a proposal? So somebody comes to you with a request for money, you're sitting there, you're looking through this, you're trying to figure out, do I bother to move forward with this or not, and how do I think about it? We're going to talk about the difference between a good idea and a good proposal. We're going to talk about the elements of a great proposal. We're going to talk about how you do due diligence in a smart, efficient, and effective way. We're going to talk about stuff you should be looking for as red flags, and then we're going to do a little practice. Is that all good? Okay, cool. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit first about the difference between ideas and proposals, which might seem fairly obvious, but I think it's something to give some serious thought to. So a great guy in this field named Joel DeRose, who worked for the Kellogg Foundation, broke most proposals into one of these 4 quadrants. A great idea with a good proposal, a good idea with a proposal that was either just badly written, suboptimal, unclear, not fully fleshed out. And the bottom 2 quadrants, a bad idea that was wrapped up in a beautiful proposal, something, like imagine you get a great, beautifully wrapped gift, and you're all excited because the wrapping paper is gorgeous and the ribbon's gorgeous, and you open it up and it's, one of these white elephants that's been passed around from your aunt to 4 other people, and you sort of wonder why it is that you had so much excitement around it. And of course, the bottom area, which is the bad idea, bad proposal. So I think we could pretty quickly dispense with spending any time in that quadrant. If it's a bad idea and a bad proposal, you can walk on. In an ideal world, of course, you would be funding great ideas baked in good proposals. But I think we're going to learn that those are sometimes few and far between in the nonprofit sector. So most of the action is in this area of, a great idea that may be written in a way where not everything is fully fleshed out, or maybe if it's from an international nonprofit, it's not written in perfect English. It may not be written in a way that's completely clear and distinctive, but there's a germ of an idea that is really important. And the art in philanthropy and what separates, great philanthropists from okay folks are those who recognize the brilliance of an idea that may be presented to them in a way that may not be obvious. Conversely, a bad idea wrapped in a glitzy proposal to you is something that sometimes takes some serious looking at, because you can get seduced by great language and people who are great at marketing and people who know how to sell. But the fundamental underlying idea may not be worth doing. So I wanted to just offer those as something to think about here. it's really pretty straightforward to reject a bad proposal. If we got great proposals in the door every day, we could go home, and this would all be really easy, and the world's problems would be solved. Bill Gates wouldn't have to be employing hundreds of people to try to figure it out. So what we're going to be focusing on is how do you find great ideas in weaker proposals? What's really strategic and viable? What do you need to learn? What do you need to ask to be smart? So let's talk first about what's a good idea. You know, a great philanthropic idea is like a great idea in business or anything else. It starts with a problem that is thoroughly understood and clearly identified. Going out and saying, I'd like to solve the problem of global warming by having a rock concert go across the country and present shows, and at the end of the show every night I'd have some star that would stand up and say, stop global warming. True proposal, I kid you not. Maybe doesn't fully articulate a clear understanding of the nature of the challenge that we face in that arena. So what is it that you're actually trying to do? Pretty simple, right? Is what these guys are proposing that you fund an effective and compelling solution to the nature of the problem. So if, again, using the global warming arena, if you are worried about the passage of effective legislation in the Senate, and you want to affect how, 10 major senators are going to vote on a cap and trade bill or whatever the next climate bill is going to be, what is the strategy that this nonprofit organization is presenting to you that would be an effective and compelling solution to get those senators to vote the way you want? Very detailed, very focused, very clear. Is it clear that the idea that they're presenting to you makes it clear what the outcome is that you want? Again, a lot of times people come forward with a lofty idea. I'd like to change and solve global poverty by holding workshops in the third world that will talk about why Americans should give away more money. Blurry. A good idea has to be clear about the outcome, and this is really the kicker. Will it have real impact? You're going to be picking and choosing among a variety of proposals, and the winning idea is one that's going to have real impact. So then we get to the question of proposals. Is the proposal itself clear? Do these guys know what they're talking about? Is this an organization that has got a track record and a commitment to the issue? Do they have a work plan that makes sense? And critically, do they know how to gauge their effectiveness? So sir.
From this, the proposal have all of these, you would have to have a good idea. So I don't understand how you would have that one watch.
Well, you can have a proposal that might, in fact, be clear about an intended outcome and even have a plan, but the fundamental strategy that they're intending to propose may not be the strategy that's going to make a significant difference. That's really the concept of the difference between the proposal and the idea. So this is a quick summary of the issues here, but just to kind of recap, when you're thinking about your philanthropy, segregate, is this an idea that addresses a pressing thing that you care about? And then is the proposal itself viable and have potential for impact? Okay, so I tried to talk to a number of colleagues and friends to identify some proposals that I wanted to share with you today that hit the gold standard. Yeah, they're up in Google Docs. This one is a 15-page proposal, so I'm going to talk about it really quickly. But I'd love for those of you who really want to dig into this and understand what's a gold standard of a proposal, take a look at this document on Google Docs. This is an organization that sought a grant of $30,000 from the Flora Family Foundation, which is the family foundation of the family members of the Hewlett family. The project itself was going to cost $115,000. They'd already gotten a $40,000 matching grant, and they were coming to the Flora Family Foundation saying, give us $30,000. Okay, so that's just the basic facts. But the important piece here is, who were these guys and what were they trying to do? This is an organization that actually has a US-based connection. The woman in the middle, in the blue, is a US-based partner to the Afghan groups, but they work with 6 organizations of Afghan women. And those of you who've been following the news in Afghanistan know a couple basic things. Terribly difficult country to work in, horrible security problems. Government is a mess. Very few NGOs that are working in Afghanistan. Of those, few are headed by women. The government turns to the nonprofit community to help deliver basic services. So you have a perfect storm here, where you have a place that needs serious help. You have very few organizations on the ground that have the capacity to deliver that help, and therefore it's very difficult for them to get money. This proposal said, if we bring a group of the best women leading NGOs together and we train them how to do their work well, we teach them about effectiveness, we teach them about financial management, we teach them how to apply for grants, we teach them how to be strategic in their work. The leverage of this over time will be significant, because it is these women who are responsible for serving literally hundreds of men and women and children throughout the country. So the proposal was $30,000 to do trainings for these women, to teach them how to be maximally effective in their work. So why is this a great idea? Anybody have any thoughts? Yeah, okay.
So I hypothesize that if these women become strong leaders, they can help create the next generation of strong leaders, and basically it will have a somewhat of telescoping effect, spreading out and getting much higher leverage than you would have just by giving it as direct aid.
Exactly. And the general score, excellent. The general temptation is to give to one group and give them to a project to do on the ground, but this to me is the ultimate leverage. You give money to a group of people who were selected among 30 different women Afghan NGOs. You train them how to do their job well. You work with them closely to manage these NGOs as well as they possibly can. And what you do ultimately is you leave behind a generation of future leaders who have the capacity to deliver the critical work that's there. But for that kind of training, these local NGOs on the ground are never going to be able to get money from major international organizations. They're going to be caught in a cycle of never having enough to move forward. So it's not an obvious or intuitive project, but it's a project that has high leverage and that has a capacity to have a ripple effect generationally. And mostly, it will leave something behind when your money goes away. The other reason why this is such a great proposal is that woman in blue, who is a complete rock star. She ran an NGO in Kabul. She's a Rhodes Scholar. She's a Fulbright Scholar. She is the ultimate leader for an organization like that. So, something to think about. Okay. I'm going to have you guys work through something here. So this is based on a real proposal for somebody locally now to start a diabetes clinic. We're going to just look at one aspect of the proposal that has to do with the goals of this organization. So here's the goals in version A. Take a quick look. Sorry for it's so long, but I'd love to just have you read it. And let me know what you think. What kind of questions would you have coming out of that? Okay. Yes. Yes. Right. Great observation. So it's not clear how the clinic affects the broader community. Yes, Jay.
I was just going to say, could you repeat what they say in the
Oh, sure. So the comment was, it appears local and it's not clear how the education program for the clinic would connect with the general public. Yeah.
It's not clear what the incidence of diabetes is currently, and so how much you're trying to.
Okay. Not clear what the incidence of diabetes is, and so how you're going to go about tackling that problem. Anybody else? Yes. Right, so you're trying to connect the dots between the problems with the folks that are diagnosed and the broader community. Okay, all really good observations. Okay, let's see how this proposal could be improved to be at least clearer on what it is that they're trying to do. So let's look at version B. Does this make it clearer what it is these folks are about? Right. This is only a portion of the proposal. The question was, it doesn't talk about expected outcomes. But I'm using this to just talk about one aspect of the proposal. And the point really simply is this. You know, a good proposal is one that is explicit about the work that the folks are going to do and makes it very obvious to them and to you the work that's going to be taken. Then it's up to you to question, is this the right kind of idea? Are these the right folks? Is this an important thing? Is it going to solve the problems we're about? But the reason I wanted to show this to you is the difference between a proposal that is fairly generic and one that is very explicit is really critical in terms of understanding the nature of the work that's going to be performed. So let's look at another aspect of this proposal. This is on a section of the same proposal. This is a real-life proposal about evaluating the impact of the. So let's look at the first version of this. Does that give you enough information to go on? Okay, what's missing? Sir? Okay, how they're going to continue to fund the organization after this year. What else? Yes? How many people they're actually serving. Great. Yes? Whether they're actually going to have any impact on the problem that they're taking on. Exactly. Anybody else? What the classes, consultations, and website would actually look like. Okay, let's see the after version of this. You know, again, there's underlying questions you need to ask about whether the strategy is right, whether the group is right, whether this is going to solve the fundamental problem they're posing. But again, I'm showing this to you as an example of the difference between a generic description of the problem and a detailed description of the problem. And good ideas have great strategy, and good proposals are as clear as day about what the organization is going to do Monday morning when they show up for work, so that a year later, when they've come back to you and said, here's our report, you two are on the same page. You're clear about what it is that they were trying to achieve. They're clear about what it is that they were trying to achieve, and you have something to measure about the effectiveness of this grant. Okay. So, any questions at this point? Everybody good? Okay. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the concept of due diligence. So, you know, this is not unlike corporate due diligence or other due diligence you do in your life. I would recommend to all of you, whether you're looking at a proposal for the Google Corporate Giving Council or your own giving, do a first cut analysis and see if the proposal can answer the fundamental questions. Is this what I want to do? I mean, interestingly, a lot of people get tripped up because they get something really interesting in the mailbox. It's not actually in an area that they particularly want to fund. They don't know a whole lot about it, but it sounds kind of cool. Or maybe a friend of theirs said, you know, this is a great organization. I'd love to have you support it. Well, if it's not fundamentally in the arena that you want to fund, you know, serious question about whether you should even go to Plan B. Is this a legitimate group? Does it have a 501c3? There's a lot of things that you can look at, but I mean, is this a group that at least passes the first sniff test? Is this a group that understands something about the topic and the context? A lot of groups now wanting to get into the area of climate change. A lot of them don't know a hell of a lot about the area of climate change. So how do you think about, you know, the qualifications of this group to understand the problem? Do they have some kind of track record in the field? Or if they don't have a track record, is there something in their background or their bios that would lead you to think, yeah, they might be a good organization? And then is the proposal reasonable? If you can't get through this first cut, I would say don't waste that organization's time and don't waste your own time. Don't do harm by spending a lot of time asking a lot of details, because at the end of the day, it is unlikely that they would be the right fit for you. So here's a second cut. And again, this is not unlike business. Assuming they make it through that first tier, how is what they're proposing that you fund compared to the other folks who are in that same field? There is no dearth of nonprofit organizations out there. And a mistake I see a lot of funders make, particularly newer funders, is they get a proposal from one group and they never really ask the question, who else is out there and what else are they doing? And is this actually the right group and staff for the job? They also may know the group by reputation, or it may be well recommended to them by a colleague or a friend, but they don't really know a lot about who else might be doing important or critical work, and whether the idea that is being presented in this proposal is crucial, complementary, duplicative, and even potentially counterproductive. And then you ask the question, what's the work plan look like? Has it got the right staff? Does this stuff all add up and make sense? And could it be improved? Looking back at those questions that we had under the goals, how can I get something with a little more granularity so I actually understand more clearly what it is that they're going to try to do? Okay, bottom line, and this is a theme that just needs to resonate throughout, and this is very much in the guidelines of the Google Corporate Giving Council, is the work going to have some impact? There is no shortage of organizations to fund. So how are you going to answer for yourself or for Google? Is the work going to have measurable impact? And how do I know? And what are they telling me when they propose a request for funds, why this work matters? Is it innovative? The philanthropic capital is risk capital. It is not intended to supplant what the government doesn't do. It's intended to use your dollars to fund innovative, scalable, important, new approaches to difficult problems. So I would say the innovative lens is an important one. Is it scalable? If this is a big project like some that the Google Corporate Giving Council have supported, is this something that's going to have the potential of impacting not hundreds of lives, but thousands of lives? And how would that happen? And critically, another thing I think people don't focus on enough is the risk worth the reward. I'm a big advocate for taking a lot of risks in your philanthropy. Philanthropic capital is risk capital. It is about you making the smartest bets and the smartest investments to try to have significant change in the world. So every proposal carries risks. You all asked and raised some important questions on the diabetes. Is this thing going to work? Is it going to actually affect the population? Is it going to change public opinion? Every proposal has risks, and your question that I encourage you to keep front of mind is the risk worth the reward? Okay. Other things to think about. And again, some of these are ideas that I know you know from your own business. So let's talk about the organization and the team. Critical in the field of the nonprofit world, maybe a little bit less so in the area of business, is how well do these guys play with others? Very few nonprofits are gold standard if they don't understand how to partner with others. And there is unfortunately a plethora of nonprofit organizations that are not good at partnering. And this is really something that's important for you to suss out. What's their credibility in the field? Do they have a network? Are these folks that other folks would say, yeah, this is really a tremendous organization? What's their reputation? What's their internal capacity to develop and sustain a project? Lots of nonprofits are undercapitalized. They're great groups. They do what they do really well. Maybe they want to take on another project and they'd love to have you fund it. But if they don't have the capacity and the bandwidth to do that, you need to take a hard look at whether this is something that you want to go forward. How good are they at dealing with challenges? The Afghan project, talk about challenges. If you look at the proposal, there's a whole page of risks, including the security in the country and whether people can show up at work and not get killed, and similar kinds of challenges. How good is the team, and how good is this organization at actually taking on and problem solving? How are they doing financially? We all know it's tough times in the nonprofit sector. It's tough times for every nonprofit. A stunning statistic that I learned in my prior work is that most, even of the highly regarded nonprofits, have about 5 months of operating capital in the bank. So many of them are teetering on what we would consider to be very challenging financial grounds, but you want to fund a group that you know is going to be here a year later at the end of your grant. And are they clearly committed to the projects? Most great nonprofits are known for what they do, are clear about what they do, are clear about what they don't do. And when they come to you with a proposal, you know that they're in that whether they get your money or somebody else's. Other nonprofits, sadly, chase dollars of foundations. So a foundation puts up something on their website saying, we like, let's pretend Google, we like to support computer technology centers in Ghana. And there's some great group in Ghana that, looks at this and says, wow, it's Google, and gee, wouldn't we love, so they're going to put together some proposal about how they're going to help put together technology centers in Ghana, except for they never done that before. And it's not clear if they don't get Google's money that they'd do it. So, this is all kind of stuff that you need to suss out about the nature of the organization. Okay, this is a really, really critical issue. Where's the money going to come from? How long are you in the game? And will there be enough for them to do what it is that they need to do? Very frequently, newer funders look at a proposal without context to what other money might be there to help make this project arrive. And a lot of people want to be able to be a first funder in and own the project and really like that idea. But it is critical to understand where the other funding is going to come from. And ideally, you will not be the only funder for a project. So going back to that Afghan example we talked about, one of the reasons why that was such a home run for the Flora Family Foundation is it was $115,000 total. They were only in for $30K. And there were other people who were picking up. So there was risk sharing in that. But you also knew that if for whatever reason, they needed to pull their money or they wanted to move on to fund other proposals, that the work would go on. So look for whether there are other funding partners. Ask really important questions about what kind of support is needed. Think long and hard about how long you want to be in a game. Some new funders say, look, I'm in it for 1 year. I'm new to this. I'm not really sure. But then be clear and explicit with the organization that your commitment is for that 1 year, which is tricky and hard because most organizations, once they get your first year of support, will hope and expect that you'll continue to fund. And ask the question of whether there's a funding gap. In the aggregate, how are you going to learn if there's going to be enough money to make this thing fly? Okay, the last thought is really, what do we know from history? And as relatively newer entrants in the field, very rarely do people ask the question, who else has done this before? And has this idea flopped? And if so, why? And maybe, we ought to do a little bit of due diligence around what sounds like a cool and really an interesting idea to you may in fact have a track record in other organizations or even in this organization. So how do you do that? Well, you talk to other folks who've been in the field. You get online and do your research. You try to find other experts who know something about the strategy. Going back to the scenario about microfinance, it has been known for a very long time that not all microfinance programs are great ideas. But a lot of newer funders coming into the field, were not aware of that research. And so it's really important to think about how am I going to piggyback on the work of others and learn how to identify whether this idea is really new and innovative or is a retread of something that has been tried before, maybe not so successfully. Or if your grantee has done something before and had some failures, what do they learn from that? A proposal that talks about that is really an incredible and important proposal. And then finally, what are they thinking about in terms of how they're evaluating their impact? Every great organization has something in a proposal about how they're going to assess for themselves, not just for you, how they know whether they're making a difference. Of course, they're going to want to tell you at the end of a year or whatever period of time it is, yeah, we were able to meet these milestones, and yeah, we think we made an impact. But the great organizations are those that are going to ask themselves the question, how do I know what I'm doing? Yeah?
You could mention whoever is BC'd in, if you could mute your mic.
Yeah, could you? Okay. Okay, are we good on this? Any questions here? Okay. Context matters. If you're google.org or even the Google Corporate Giving Council, and you're giving away grants in the $500,000 a year or up to $500,000 a year level, the level of due diligence you're going to do on that project and that proposal is obviously going to be substantially more than if you're an individual donor who at the end of the year says, you know, I really like this group and I'm just going to get in and make an initial grant to them, and maybe it's going to be $1,000. And it's going to be kind of my way of getting in the swimming pool and testing whether this seems like a good relationship. You know, it's seemingly obvious, but sometimes people lose sight of the fact that you've got to be proportional with the amount of due diligence you do to the amount of money that you're going to give away. One of the things I hear a lot of great nonprofit leaders complain about is newer funders want to do this comprehensive due diligence I've been talking about, and at the end of the day, they're willing to give them, you know, $500, $1,000. The opportunity cost, the cost that that nonprofit went through to get your money is completely disproportionate to the value of what you got. So in the do no evil, do no harm school, you know, it's just a critical thing to keep in front of mind. You are here as a partner of these organizations. Your due diligence should be appropriate. You know, I'd love to have you all look at the difference between the Energy Foundation, which is one of the leading foundations working on climate change, gives away millions and millions of dollars a year in a very strategic, very disciplined approach to how you reduce CO2 emissions per individual philanthropic dollar invested. Brilliant strategy, but loads and loads of money. And they put people through significant hoops, as they should, because they're making big bets with organizations where they need to know that these organizations have really analyzed the problem deeply. Flora Family Foundation that funded the Afghan project we were talking about, there's a family foundation that funds more local grassroots groups. Some of them at $30,000 a year, $20,000 a year, $10,000 a year. They go about this in a really different way. So last rule of thumb, if you take nothing else away from this presentation today, remember these ideas. Is the idea credible? Is the group and the team capable? Is the idea feasible? Is it important? Okay, cool. Red flags. We've talked about some of these already. I think the most critical red flag is that it's not clear from the proposal what these guys are going to do with your money. Seems obvious, but you would be shocked at the number of people who fund proposals based on a very blurry, very generic statement of the scope of work. The Afghan women proposal is a great example of an exceedingly detailed proposal of the scope of work, down to literally how many training sessions and when are they going to be. Not all of them have to be that good, and frankly that one was that good because it was written by a group of very sophisticated funders in New York who are working with these women in Afghanistan. A lot of proposals you're going to get from newer groups, smaller groups, grassroots groups, international groups are going to be fairly generic, perhaps, in how they're going to go about the execution. But if you're going to give away a lot of money, or you're dealing with a group that's pretty sophisticated, you know, it's not only something that you should demand. I'd say it's ethically critical for you to ask them to be clear, because you're making a decision to fund them and not another group. And the opportunity cost to give money to them and not another group really should be based on a really careful analysis. Second one, missing or incomplete financials should be pretty obvious why that's a red flag. You know, some groups are wonderful and they are in deep economic doo-doo. And, you know, as much as you'd like to bail them out of that particular conundrum, typically speaking, it's not a great idea to fund a group that is in serious financial straits, as much as the idea is good, because it is highly unlikely they're going to be around in a year. And sometimes, you know, that can be, I suppose, described as a survival of the fittest strategy, you know, but I am firmly of the view that you've got to fund strong organizations, not necessarily those with the biggest bank accounts, but strong organizations that are at least financially sound, so that they're going to be here to do the work. Third one, staff bios don't show that they have the skills to execute. This is where a lot of folks get tripped up. A lot of people are wonderful in their field. They're just not particularly skilled at doing the project that they're proposing. And I think it's important to segregate, you know, does this person have a luminous CV from, does the team actually have the capacity to do what they're asking you to do? Knowledge of best practice is not apparent. do they actually, have they been around the block? Do they know whatever other people have done? Do they have enough scar tissue to understand what it is that they're trying to take on, particularly if it's a very ambitious proposal? And the last thing is really about boards. This doesn't have to be a deal killer, but I tend to like to fund nonprofits that have pretty solid boards and where the board's on top of things and they know what's going on and they're in the game. So these are things that I'd encourage you to keep a look at them. Okay, any questions? We have 10 minutes to practice.
We can go over a little.
Okay, cool. Questions, sir?
Hi, I volunteer as a grant writer
Yes.
for a few nonprofits.
Right.
I think they're doing really dynamic things.
Great.
And I was wondering, one thing we run up into is that we're very successful with grants where we request actual like medical equipment or computers. Or
Right.
really hard tangible things. When we run up in the stumbling blocks is when we try to request salaries.
Right.
And,
Right.
How do we fund overhead operating expenses as opposed to actual medicine or computers or
Right. Right. So the question is what we call in the philanthropic trade a request for general operating support. And the question was, it's easy for us to get money to, have somebody give us medical equipment or things that people feel are going to actually go out and be used in the field. But when we ask them for a request for how do you pay somebody's salary or keep the lights on or pay for the rent, people yawn and say, boring, and they don't want to do that. That is not your problem. It is your problem, of course. It's a problem for donors. So I'm really glad you brought that up because, we've been talking about proposals and ideas that tend to be more project-based work. But a lot of times what an organization desperately needs is operating capital. I mean, imagine if, the initial investors in Google said, we would really only like to fund Pablo and Amit and 4 other people. We don't want to pay for the building. We don't want to have to pay all these other salaries. We would just like to fund a few little thingies. Not coherent, right? But in the nonprofit sector, we do that all the time. So I've been talking a lot about proposals for particular work, but a lot of our job in educating you and other donors about philanthropy is when you've got a great organization that does great work, and what they really need is the money to keep the lights on. That is as legitimate or more legitimate than starting some new proposal, which might sound really sexy and cool, but that doesn't actually allow the organization to do what it does. So a lot of what's been going on in the world of philanthropy over the last couple of years is trying to educate individual donors and organizations that money for general operations is actually good money and important money. And I'd be happy afterwards to talk to you about ways to sort of make that pitch. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Could the VC folks checking in please mute again? We're having some really cool sounds. A little distracting. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Sort of on the same line, I think as a donor, you have option of providing ongoing support to organizations.
Right.
Doing good work,
Right.
Of just handing away to some other organization that then, farms out, right? I don't know if Flora Foundation takes money or not, right?
Yeah.
Or looking for grants yourself. But how do you look at that trade-off?
So the question is, how do you look at the trade-off between staying with an organization over a period of time, or maybe going out and finding other newer organizations, or maybe even trying to raise money to fund other things? Do I have that right? This is, again, one of the serious conundrums, and there are different schools of thought and different strategies. The Flora Family Foundation is a foundation that believes in general, ongoing, long-term operating support for organizations over at least a 3-year period, on the theory that if you're going to come in and give somebody a little bit of money and then you're going to be gone the next year, that can be quite dislocating. And what's really tough for most nonprofits who are operating on the edge is the money comes in, then it goes, and they never know from year to year who's with them. I am a strong proponent of multi-year support. When you find organizations that are great and you've done enough homework and maybe you've been with them for, maybe a test period and you believe in their work, why not continue to support them in a serious way and advocate for them, as opposed to saying, well, that was really fun, but I'm a little bored, And so now I'd love to go off and, find some other really cool idea. It goes back to what I flagged in the beginning, but we haven't had a chance to talk about today. But I think is really critical when you go back to the fundamental question, what are my goals? What are my strategy? And how do I develop a giving plan that makes sense? The number one complaint from a number of nonprofits about newer donors is people come in, give a lot of money to something, big hoop-de-doo, the organization builds up all this expectation, and they're gone. And they didn't tell them what was going on. Or people ping pong because it's kind of fun and cool, and a lot of people are coming to you, asking you for money, so it's just sort of fun to dabble. Dabbling does not yield impact. We're going to go back to the beginning. If you are serious about this work and you want to make a significant impact, the most important way to do that is to find those extraordinary grantees who have really important, innovative ideas and stick with them and be willing to, stay the course through the tough times. It doesn't mean you have to fund them forever, but it does mean that you think long and hard about the direction you're in, and then you're there for a while to make a significant difference. Okay, yeah, that would be great. Okay, so we have maybe 10 minutes. So I have two case studies. One is one that Jay shared for me, which is of an organization called Campfed. Campfed is a really well-regarded international NGO that's been around since 1993 that supports educating women and girls. I'll just talk to you about it while Pablo finds it. They proposed to the Google Corporate Giving Council that the council fund them to set up a bunch of ICTs, 3 ICTs in a rural part of Ghana. The proposal was based on the fact that they had had success doing something similar to this in Zambia. And they had been through the process and they knew what they were doing. And they came to Google and said, you're aligned with the interest in supporting computer technology. In this case, it's an effort to try to teach girls how to become more computer literate with the goal that they would, be able to get jobs. And so this is a 5-page proposal that you can look at after today in some detail that the Corporate Giving Council said, yeah, this is, first of all, within our strike zone. This is the kind of stuff that Google would be good at. It's a great group, and it's an idea that they've already proven, and it's an idea that we can scale. And ultimately, it's going to have leverage because we're going to fund these 3 centers, but we're going to train girls, and over time, we're going to have the opportunity of having these girls have a much better sense of how to get jobs in the tech sector. So Google green-lighted this proposal, and it was a great idea. My question to you all is, so the other salient fact is, it was a request to set up the centers and then run them for 2 years. 3 years, excuse me. So just quick reactions. Why do you think the Corporate Giving Council signed on to this idea? Yes, in the back. Right. So the comment was it had the snowballing effect of training people who had the capacity to have broader impact. Great point. I don't know if that's what you thought about, but it seems like that was in your sweet spot. What else? Why is it a good fit for Google? Yes. Exactly, increasing more women in the technology center. That's a corporate value. Excellent. What else? Anybody else? Pablo.
Another point of the good match of Google is we know technology, and so we have a good sense of whether or not they're doing it right.
Right. So we know technology. We could come in and help. And in fact, the proposal contemplated that Google folks would actually come and work on site there. So, big win. What would the risks of this be? Bingo. Is it clear that the proposal that was so successful in Zambia is going to translate to Ghana? Are they going to have the right team? Are there something in the country conditions that may not apply? And how would you know? Anything else? Any other thoughts? And I think this is a fabulous proposal. Yeah.
Is there funding for, once those 3 years of funding is up, how is it going to keep going?
Goal. Fantastic. Critical point. You know, a lot of what happens in philanthropy is people come in, great idea, a lot of excitement, even, you know, do the right thing, multi-year funding. 3 years down the road, where's the money? So the challenge for this project and proposal, and they explicitly acknowledge this. So, you know, I think Google made the right choice, but they explicitly acknowledge this. How do you work with this grantee, since you've made the commitment, over the next 3 years to ensure that at the end of the day, you've left something behind, and if you want this project to continue, there's somebody else in the game with you. This is something that most funders don't think about, and I've seen it over and over and over all around the developing world. Organization comes in, they're the only funder, funded for 3 years. End of the day, they're looking around, trying to find somebody else to keep it going. Nobody wants to play. So that's a great example. Sir?
Do you know in this particular case what was happening in the first country?
Jay, you want to speak to that? Jay knows something about that. The question was, do you know what was happening in the first country?
So in Zambia, the tech centers were hugely successful. Obviously, conditions were different, and the way in which they set it up.
Specifically in terms of continued funding.
Right. So in terms of continued funding, it was the first time they had done this, and they did it in conjunction with the Goldman 10,000 Donor Initiative. So they were the sole funders up front. But they found that traditional donors who had given to Campfed in the past were really energized by them entering this new space where they were able to create a hub, both for women and for the communities around the tech center, and found that both through like micro enterprise models for like a fee for use for local community members who weren't part of this group of women they were targeting, charging them a nominal fee for printing, copying, interviews, to generate some income, and then in addition, they really energized their traditional fundraising base to give money specifically to this project.
Right. Yeah, great point. Okay, I think we have a few more minutes, and I'm wondering if we can do any other questions on this one? It's a great idea. I think we've identified some of the risks. I think one of the, and I commend this to you to read as a sample of a really good proposal that went to Google as something that was clear. It was obvious that the organization knew what they were doing. They had a track record. They had a vision. The grant was leveraged. Important innovative work in a part of the world that desperately needs this kind of thing. And the multiplier effect of influencing and educating, you know, literally thousands of these kinds of girls and bringing economic opportunity really high. So bravo, it was a great idea. Okay, this proposal, Campfed is a great organization. They're supported by the Skoll Foundation, very well regarded, top tier. You know, an organization that's got plenty of help and support when they need to write a grant request. You know, 90% of international organizations do not fall into this category, which is why I talked in the beginning about the difference between a really good idea and a proposal that might not, you know, in our Western ways, completely pass standard. And I want to talk at the end, and maybe you can help me pull up the little Ugandan case study that I have here. It's I think you have it here in the. So I want to leave you with a real story of two schools that we went to go see, and I really just typed up. I might mostly talk to you about it. I took a group of donors in the 4th or 5th year of the program that I ran to Kampala, Uganda, and we were studying issues around education. And we went to go see two different groups in the broader Kampala area. They'll bring it up. The facts are not complicated. And it's not, I'm not actually showing you the real proposals, although I have them here, and I think they would be instructive for those of you who are interested in supporting international organizations, because they are a far cry, honestly, from the kind of caliber of the proposals we've talked about today. But they're the reality for most grassroots groups. So we went to go see two different organizations. Two schools working with kids in the broader Kampala region, which is the capital of Uganda. One school was called Mother Care. It had been founded, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years ago, a little bit in the outskirts of the city, lots and lots of kids who were AIDS orphans, very, very poor. Okay, this is the case study, and you can take a look at this after today. But fundamentally, they started with 3 kids in nursery school, and they've now grown to have 850 kids. Nobody could pay school fees. This place was desperately poor. I mean, you drive out, and there's a couple of old ramshackle buildings, and most of the kids can't afford to pay to go to school. You've got to pay tuition in Uganda to go to school. Nonetheless, the teachers were great, and the school had a great reputation in the broader Kampala community as a place that educated these kids really well. So they came to us and they gave us a 3-page proposal. I'd be happy to share it with you because I think it's a real eye-opener. Saying to our group that was visiting, here's all the stuff we need. And you can see, sorry, the typeface is so small, but classrooms, a nursery school, a library, a school hall, computer center, sport. I mean, basically, they gave us a laundry list of organizations, of improvements that could happen. Docs. Yeah. We're just not even going to worry about that. Okay, second place we went, called the Railways Children's School. It was started in the 40s as the school for the children of the Ugandan Railway Workers Corporation. Basically same kind of student body, but urban. These are, kids who's, we're talking people 8 to a room, 1-room houses, no light. Large percentage of these kids are orphans, large percentage of families.
The VC
Here we
folks
go.
may not be able to hear
Oh,
you.
VC folks, sorry. Okay, so second school, Railways Children's School, same fundamental problems. The needs are extraordinary. And, but this school also had a reputation for great teaching. And they came to us and said, we love some money for a variety of things. Some morning reading sessions, some workshops for writing. We want to be able to teach some of these kids how to, basically create baskets so that, because they're never going to go on to secondary school. So we want to actually teach them some trades so they can, make a living. And we'd like to have you pave the tarmac. And they presented a budget. So you have these 2 schools with roughly the same kind of population. And we as a group, needed to evaluate, do we want to support them? And how would we figure this out? Not wanting to be burdensome to them, not wanting them to jump through lots of hoops, knowing that these are places that are living pretty much on the edge. So my questions, if we could scroll, let's see how we do this. My questions are basically, would you fund either one? What would you need to know? How would you figure that out? And what would go through your minds as you think about this real life scenario? So, anybody have any thoughts?
You can look at the school leadership to see if there are people you can trust that first of all, they won't embezzle or steal your money, and second of all, they'll use it well and they will stick to their budget.
Right. So the question is, look to the school leadership, figure out, can you trust these guys? Would they use their money well? Maybe not embezzle it. Do I trust the team? Do I trust the leadership? Right. What other questions would you ask? Yes. Is there actually a budget associated with this? I mean, they list a lot of things, but how much are they really asking? Right. So you asked the question, is there a budget? One group gave us a budget, the other group did not give us a budget. What would that tell you? Well, me, I don't know how much things cost. Yeah. Right. Right. But would it be a red flag that they didn't give you a budget? Yeah. Right. Okay. So the comment was, it looks like poor planning or not sufficient planning, not to at least include a budget. Okay. Anything else? Leadership, budget. Anything else about sort of what they asked for, what they wanted? Yes. Fantastic. So the question was, how much of what they're asking for is really going to make a difference? And, is this a kind of place where they should have a computer center with 20 computers? Is that even appropriate to this organization? So, is what they're asking for the right thing for you to be funding, or the best thing for you to be funding? And should you make that decision, or should they make that decision? Yes? Yeah. Actually, it was just there was a muddy field where the kids had to walk across to go to school, so they just wanted to be able to pave it over so the kids weren't like walking around in mud. Okay. But the fundamental question both of you raised is, what were they going to use the money for? And this is, again, one of these delicate things, because sometimes organizations come and they say, we really want the money for this. And sometimes that may or may not make sense. The first organization that asked for the laundry list of everything humanly possible, to me, that was a red flag. They were fishing. And, you know, you cannot fault them. A bunch of wealthy Americans show up, potentially with money in their pockets, and they're wanting to see what you might be interested in. But the other organization asked for something that was really critical, which was money to pay for their teachers, because their teachers didn't have enough salary. It was money to train their teachers, and it was money to focus on the things that they were really known for, which was their writing program and efforts to go out to parents and teach the parents in these poor, tough communities why it was important for their kids to learn to read. Yes?
What about accountability? So you ask those organizations to see how they should
Right. So the question was, how do you deal with the question of accountability, and how, probably in a respectful way, do you ask enough questions to know whether the money is going to really be well used? And should it be your decision, or should it be their decision? So who can guess where we gave the money? I'm going to wrap up now. Who can guess where we gave the money? Which one? Number 2, railways. Okay, absolutely. The fact that there was a proposal, railways had a stronger teacher. They were asking for information that was core to what it was that they were doing. There's a tremendous postscript to this story. This school has ended up being probably one of the finest schools in the entire country of Uganda. The woman who runs it got some books, was able to pave over that muddy field, was able to pay her teachers more, and was able to give scholarships to some of the poorest kids. This is now one of the most high-performing schools in the district. It is sending kids on to some of the most elite secondary schools in the country. It is a huge, huge credit. It was not a big fancy glitzy proposal. Most importantly, though, the head teacher was able to instill a program of reading in the morning that was then adopted by the Ugandan Ministry of Education. So that has now become public policy for the entire country. So I leave you with that story because you don't always know. And what you're doing at the end of the day is making educated bets on who you think is the best team with the work that, you know, can have a meaningful impact over time. So, incredible success story. I encourage all of you to go to Kampala, Uganda, and go see this school. It's a rock star. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate having had the opportunity to be here.